Right, hello. Last week I made a video where I set out to prove that you can totally make new playstyles with just the weapons that have been announced to come with SotO, or rather its updates, probably coming early next year, by putting forward the idea that these weapons could be a little more mechanically involved than most e-spec weapons because they come standalone. And so this is part 2, going over the ideas for the medium classes. If you want some more details, check out the first video. The important bits are that I have to stick mostly within what's been established that weapons are allowed to do. Or rather, what's been established that are mechanics that are allowed to be on weapons. Though I can bend plausibility a little bit here and there. After all, these are just concepts. And I'm not going to get super specific in terms of implementation and balance. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get started with probably one of the most complicated things I came up with, and that's Thief. And for Thief, I came up with something that's actually quite common among rogue-type characters across various games, and that's a combo system. One of the main issues many people, including myself, have with Thief, particularly in PvE, is that Thief is heavily inclined to just pick one really good weapon skill and spam it as much as possible. There's really only 2 builds that have dealt with this in some way, and that's Rifle Deadeye that gets around this issue by essentially using your utility skills with such frequency that they act kind of like weapon skills do on other builds. And then Spectre by giving you a separate form that just does not use initiative at all, essentially dramatically increasing the number of skills you're actually meant to be using. Now, a combo system that only interfaces with one weapon is obviously rather limited. This could really stand to be put on a core trait line or a full-on elite spec, but that's not on the table right now, and it's kind of hard to implement regardless. Though I do think with future expansions, we could see additional trait lines being added rather than more weapons. Anyway, we're working with what we have, and what we have is Axe. So here's the concept. I'm taking some ideas from Ranger Hammer here, where all of the skills that Axe has have multiple versions, essentially a base version that is weaker and an empowered state that, well, is stronger. What makes this a combo system is the condition by which these skills become empowered. For the 2 and the 3, it is that they become empowered whenever you use a different skill that spends initiative. So say you cast the 3, the 2 then becomes empowered. You cast the 2, 3 becomes empowered, and so on. And then, when you use an empowered weapon skill, your sneak attack also becomes empowered. So to recap as an example, you could use the Axe 2, which then empowers the Axe 3, which if you use that, both the Axe 2 and your sneak attack become empowered, giving you 2 different options on how to proceed. That's already at least 3 skills, which, yeah, I know is a lot of hoops for just 3 skills. There's also some fine-tuning to be done here, like if the empowered state is available for a certain duration, or if it has to be the next non-auto skill, kind of like sneak attack always having to be your next attack after using stealth. But that sort of thing is really hard to map out on just paper, and would have to be playtested to see what actually works out. Obviously, all of this isn't perfect, but with this system, and including both stealth and initiative mechanics, which you will have to use your utilities and weapon swap to manage, I think this is a lot more engaging than a lot of the current, 1 to 2 button Thief builds. Everything that's kind of beyond this starts feeling out of scope for just a weapon, like trying to incorporate weapon swap or trying to work across multiple weapons. The one benefit Thief has here is that it has at least 2 dual attack skills, so you could totally make this work to be available to both power and condi builds with dagger and pistol respectively. It's a bit of a heavily condensed fix to a rather complicated problem. Anyway, the skin idea really doesn't have to be anything specific, it just needs to be sufficiently sleek so it could make sense on a thief. Anyway, let's move on to engineer, and yeah, I'm gonna have to confess that I really couldn't think of anything. Engineer's gameplay tends to be so heavily influenced by its elite specs and their mechanics that it feels like the core class doesn't really have much going for it besides the existence of kits. And that's not a lot to work off of. So I had to fall back on the old standby, which is turrets. As much as I don't personally care for them, are kind of the thing for video game engineers to use. But in Guild Wars, they're not really allowed to be good for the very same reason that Necrominions aren't allowed to be good, at least not on their own. I'm just kind of copying what I did for Necro for this one. All we have to do to fix that is give them an active gameplay element so that they can't be used for just AFK farming. So I'd like to make the Shortbow gadget themed, where the idea is each of the skills, besides maybe the auto attack, delivers some sort of gadget, kind of like how all the pistol skills represent different types of special ammo. With the two most important ones being the 5 that puts down a turret, that can just be a copy of the existing rifle turret skill except that you can put it down at range, and the 4 that puts down an AoE lightning field that pulls some damage, but more importantly applies a buff to all turrets inside, essentially creating an overcharge field, massively increasing the damage they can do. The 2 and 3 can really just be regular attacks with fancy names, something like a rocket shot or a mine. It's really not a complicated concept. If you can think of something more creative, let me know. For a skin, I imagine a clunky, clearly completely overly customized bow that has attachments and weird cutouts, like holes in the stock where the specialized gadget ammo is going to be stored. I think something like that would tie a very non-technological weapon like a bow a lot better into engineer as a concept. Moving on to Ranger. I was really hoping for some pet-focused gameplay with it. I thought it just made sense. Druid kind of completely ignores the pet, Soulbeast gets rid of it, so it was time we got one that really played around it, playing into the fantasy of the Beastmaster Ranger. And while we did get the controllable pet, it's really not a focus of your gameplay. And again, Mech has shown why having a really good, independently strong pet can be a problem. So, here I go again with the fix of just tying the pet's effectiveness to how much you're doing yourself. The concept is to use something very similar to what Greatsword 2 already does. For those not familiar, Greatsword 2, when you use it, applies a buff to your pet that strengthens its next attack. And I want to take that to the next logical step, by making the interaction go both ways. So, here's the concept. Whenever your pet uses a non-auto-attacking skill, similar to what I did for Thief, all of the mace skills flip over into an empowered state, kind of like Unleashed Hammer. After using one of those empowered mace skills, your pet gains a major damage buff. Or maybe its attacks for a certain amount of time would apply conditions that use your stats. If you wanted to make this a condition-based weapon, it just kind of works both ways. That way, you're essentially bouncing the buff back and forth like we're playing The World Ends With You. Leave a comment if you know what I'm talking about. It's actually pretty simple, and basically the way I hoped Untamed would have worked, but, it doesn't. It'd be a bit hard to use without the controllable pet of Untamed, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. A new playstyle is still a new playstyle even if it ties into a specific spec. For a skin, it doesn't necessarily have to be anything specific, though I imagined some Jotun-themed rock clubs to get a sort of primal man and nature theming across. I did also get this idea stuck in my head of making beehive clubs and the buff being bee-themed and the bees flying between you and your pet, and that is probably one of the stupidest ideas I've ever had, and I can't stop thinking about it. Bee interludes aside, that's it for the medium classes. I hope you liked at least one of these ideas, and if you did, maybe, YouTube things, leave a like, maybe subscribe. I'm hopefully going to be back next week with the heavy weapons, which is going to be the final set, obviously. So until then, goodbye.